Let me be direct with you from the outset. What happened in Khartoum this morning is not just another diplomatic development in Africa's longest civil war. It is not another ceasefire announcement destined to collapse within 48 hours. What happened at 9:47 a.m. local time, exactly 23 minutes after the African Union Emergency Summit concluded in Addis Ababa, is a complete recalibration of the power structure in Northeast Africa. And if you are not paying attention to this, you are missing the single most significant geopolitical shift on the African continent since the fall of Gaddafi in 2011. I am looking at a joint communique that was released simultaneously in Arabic, English, and Mandarin Chinese, not French, which has dominated African diplomatic communications for over a century. Mandarin Chinese. The document announces that Sudan's Sovereign Council has signed a comprehensive security partnership with the People's Republic of China, granting Beijing exclusive port development rights in Port Sudan, establishing a Chinese naval logistics facility on the Red Sea, and inviting People's Liberation Army advisors to restructure Sudan's military command. This is not a trade agreement. This is not an infrastructure deal. This is China planting a flag on the Red Sea, 200 kilometers south of the Suez Canal, at the exact choke point where 12% of global maritime trade passes every single day. In the next 20 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly why this decision represents the end of Western influence in Sudan, why the African Union Summit was nothing more than theater designed to provide diplomatic cover, and why this single agreement will force Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, and the United States to completely recalculate their Red Sea strategies within the next 90 days. This is the Daily Brief. Subscribe now if you have not already, because what we are about to cover is being actively analyzed by Pentagon strategists, State Department officials, and intelligence analysts across 3 continents. You are not getting this from CNN, MSNBC, or Fox News. Let's start with Port Sudan, because geography determines everything in this story. Port Sudan sits on the western coast of the Red Sea, directly across from Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. The distance between Port Sudan and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the southern gateway to the Red Sea, is approximately 100 kilometers. To put that in perspective, that is the same distance between Washington, D.C. and Miami. Control Port Sudan, and you have eyes on every vessel moving between the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean. You can monitor Saudi oil exports. You can track Israeli commercial shipping. You can observe American naval movements. And most importantly, you can project power across the entire Horn of Africa without needing permission from anyone. Sudan has been in a state of civil war since April 2023, when fighting erupted between the Sudanese armed forces, led by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and the Rapid Support Forces paramilitary group, led by Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, known as Hemedti. The conflict has killed an estimated 150,000 people, according to the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project. The United Nations has documented over 10 million internally displaced persons. The African Union, the European Union, and the United States have all attempted mediation. Every single effort has failed. The Jeddah peace talks in May 2023 collapsed within 11 days. The Addis Ababa framework from October 2023 lasted 6 days. The Cairo initiative from January 2024 was rejected before negotiations even began. And here is where it gets interesting. While Western diplomats were organizing their summits and issuing their statements, China was doing something completely different. According to reporting by Reuters and confirmed by multiple regional intelligence sources, Chinese Special Envoy Liu Jianchao made 7 separate trips to Khartoum between March 2025 and February 2026. Not to Addis Ababa, where the African Union meets. Not to Cairo, where Arab League discussions happen. To Khartoum. Directly to the Sovereign Council. Directly to General al-Burhan. Each trip lasted between 36 and 72 hours. No public announcements, no press conferences. No statements to international media. Subscribe if you are watching this and realizing you are not getting this level of analysis anywhere else. Now, let's talk about what China actually built while everyone else was talking. Announcement number one, the Port Infrastructure Agreement. And this one matters more than anything else because it establishes irreversible Chinese presence on the Red Sea for the next 99 years. The agreement, which was finalized on April 30th, 2026, grants China Merchants Port Holdings exclusive development rights for Port Sudan's container terminals, oil export facilities, and naval berthing infrastructure. And the contract value is $3, $8 billion over 5 years. That number matters because it is larger than Sudan's entire annual government budget, which the International Monetary Fund estimates at $2. $1 billion for 2025. China is not investing in Sudan. China is purchasing Sudan. The terms include construction of 4 new deep water berths capable of handling post-Panamax container vessels, which are ships too large to fit through the original Panama Canal locks. Each berth will have a draft depth of 18 meters, sufficient for fully loaded Chinese Type 055 destroyers, which draw 11 meters when combat loaded. Commander Richard Hayes of the United States Naval War College has stated publicly, and I am quoting him directly here, that any port facility capable of servicing post-Panamax commercial vessels can service every surface combatant in the People's Liberation Army Navy except aircraft carriers. According to Defense News and confirmed by satellite imagery analysis from Stratfor, construction equipment began arriving at Port Sudan on March 15, 2026. 6 weeks before the agreement was publicly announced. Chinese engineering battalions operating under civilian contractor cover have already completed preliminary dredging of the northern approach channel. The imagery shows approximately 47 pieces of heavy construction equipment, including 4 large dredging platforms and multiple crane installations. This is not a proposal. This is an ongoing military-grade construction project that was pre-positioned before any public announcement. Received, that is announcement number 1. Announcement number 2, the Naval Logistics Facility. This is the part that changes everything for Red Sea security dynamics. Buried in Annex C of the Port Development Agreement, which was obtained and partially published by the Africa Report on May 3, 2026, is a provision authorizing China to establish what the document calls a Maritime Security Coordination Center adjacent to the commercial port facilities. Maritime Security Coordination Center is diplomatic language. What it actually means is a naval base. The facility will include fuel storage capacity for 50,000 tons of marine diesel, accommodation for up to 500 personnel, and dedicated berthing for what the agreement describes as maritime security vessels. Let's be precise about what maritime security vessels means in Chinese military terminology. According to the International Institute for Strategic Studies, China currently operates 79 vessels designated as maritime security or Coast Guard platforms that are functionally indistinguishable from naval frigates. They carry 76mm deck guns, anti-ship missiles, and advanced radar systems. They are warships with a different paint job. Think carefully about what this represents. China currently operates one acknowledged overseas military base in Djibouti, established in 2017. That facility sits 850 kilometers south of Port Sudan. With both facilities operational, China will have overlapping surveillance coverage of the entire southern Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden, and the approaches to the Suez Canal. Every American carrier strike group transiting between the Mediterranean and the Persian Gulf will pass within 200 kilometers of Chinese radar coverage. Every Israeli commercial vessel traveling to Eilat will be monitored. Every Saudi oil tanker heading to European markets will be tracked. Egypt's Al Ahram newspaper reported on May 5th that Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi convened an emergency National Security Council meeting within 6 hours of the Port Sudan announcement. According to sources who spoke to Reuters on condition of anonymity, el-Sisi described the Chinese naval facility as a direct threat to Egyptian control of Red Sea maritime corridors. The meeting concluded with no public statement, which in Egyptian political culture means the situation is being treated as a crisis too sensitive for public discussion. Stay with me because this is where the narrative completely changes and where the African Union's role becomes impossible to ignore. Announcement number 3, and this one almost nobody in the mainstream media is connecting correctly. The African Union summit that concluded 23 minutes before Sudan's announcement was not a peace negotiation. It was diplomatic cover. The summit, officially titled the Extraordinary Session on Sudan Peace and Reconciliation, convened in Addis Ababa on May 6, 2026, with representatives from 43 African Union member states. The final communique, released at 9:24 a.m. East Africa time, called for immediate ceasefire, inclusive political dialogue, and respect for Sudan's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Standard diplomatic language, completely unenforceable, designed to provide exactly enough international legitimacy for Sudan's government to claim it had exhausted regional diplomatic options before making a strategic realignment. Here is what makes this obvious. According to Bloomberg, reporting confirmed by multiple diplomatic sources, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi was in Addis Ababa during the summit. Wasidar Sri Sar Ard Saudari not participating in the summit, meeting separately with Sudanese Foreign Minister Ali al-Sadiq on the sidelines. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. Photographs published by China's Xinhua news agency show both ministers signing documents. Those documents were not released to summit participants. They were not mentioned in the African Union communique, and they were announced in Khartoum 23 minutes after the summit concluded. The timing is not coincidental. The timing is coordinated. Sudan needed regional diplomatic coverage to avoid accusations of unilateral action. China needed African Union acquiescence to avoid appearing as a neo-colonial power. The summit provided both. The African Union gets to claim it is pursuing peace. Sudan gets to claim it explored all regional options. China gets a naval base on the Red Sea. Everyone got what they needed except the people actually trying to end the war. Received? That is announcement number 3. Now, let's talk about what is really happening behind the headlines, because there are 2 stories playing out simultaneously, and the mainstream media is only covering one of them. The first story is about Sudan and China. The second story is about the complete collapse of the Western-led diplomatic framework in Africa, and that is the story that matters in the long run. For the past 3 years, the United States, the European Union, and regional powers like Saudi Arabia and the UAE have operated under the assumption that they control the diplomatic process in Sudan. They organized the Jeddah talks. They funded the African Union mediation. They imposed sanctions. In fact, they threatened consequences, and none of it mattered. Not because their diplomacy was incompetent, but because they fundamentally misread what Sudan's government actually needed. Western diplomats believed Sudan needed legitimacy, humanitarian aid, and debt relief. What Sudan actually needed was money, security guarantees, and a patron willing to ignore human rights concerns. China provided all 3. The 3 dollars. $8 billion port development deal delivers immediate capital. The naval logistics facility provides security against both internal threats and external pressure. And China's non-interference policy means no lectures about civilian casualties, democratic governance, or war crimes investigations. Secretary of State Antony Blinken issued a statement on May 6th expressing concern about foreign military presence in Sudan and calling for transparency in international agreements. That statement was released at 4:47 p.m. Washington time, nearly 7 hours after the Port Sudan announcement. 7 hours. The State Department was not consulted. They were not notified in advance. They found out the same way you are finding out right now by reading the news. The European Union's response was even more telling. High Representative Josep Borrell released a statement calling for all parties to prioritize humanitarian access and respect international law. Notice what is not in that statement. Any mention of China, any mention of Port Sudan, any mention of consequences, because there are no consequences Europe is willing to impose. Sudan is not part of NATO. It is not part of the European Economic Zone. Europe has no leverage, and everyone involved knows it. Saudi Arabia and the UAE, which have both invested heavily in Sudanese politics and backed different factions in the civil war, have gone completely silent. Not a single public statement from Riyadh. Not a single tweet from Abu Dhabi. Why? Because both countries are heavily invested in Chinese infrastructure projects under the Belt and Road Initiative. Saudi Arabia's Neom megacity project relies on Chinese construction expertise. The UAE's Khalifa port was built and is operated by Chinese state-owned enterprises. Neither country can publicly oppose Chinese expansion in Sudan without jeopardizing billions of dollars in Chinese investment at home. Think carefully about what this represents. When the United States conducts a major geopolitical maneuver and its closest Middle Eastern allies not only refuse to support it, but remain completely silent, that is not diplomatic caution. That is a recognition that American influence in the region has structural limits that did not exist 20 years ago. If you are an American taxpayer, what is happening in Port Sudan is not a foreign policy story. It is a defense budget story. The United States currently maintains the Combined Joint Task Force, Horn of Africa at Camp Lemonnier in Djibouti, the same city where China established its first overseas base. That facility costs American taxpayers approximately $70 million per year, according to Department of Defense budget documents. With China now operating two overlapping facilities in Djibouti and Port Sudan, every American military operation in the region will be conducted under Chinese surveillance. That cost is not measured in dollars. It is measured in operational security, strategic surprise, and the ability to project power without adversary awareness. This pattern has repeated throughout history, and every time it repeats, the outcome is the same. Let me take you back to the Peloponnesian War, 431 to 404 BC. Athens and Sparta, the two dominant powers in ancient Greece, fought a 27-year war for supremacy. Both sides exhausted themselves. Athens lost its navy, its treasury, and its empire. Sparta won the war, but was so weakened it could not maintain control. And who actually won? Macedon. Philip II and later his son, Alexander the Great, swept in and conquered the entire Greek world because the two previous powers had destroyed each other. The United States and its European allies have spent 3 years organizing summits, imposing sanctions, and issuing statements about Sudan. China spent 3 years building relationships, negotiating contracts, and moving construction equipment. The West exhausted its diplomatic capital trying to shape Sudan's internal politics. China ignored Sudan's internal politics and bought the coastline. The parallel is exact. The United States is Athens, organizing coalitions and speeches. China is Macedon, waiting for the right moment and then moving decisively when everyone else is distracted. So where does this leave us? Let me give you 3 clear paths because there is no honest middle ground here. Path 1, Western powers accept Chinese presence in Port Sudan as a fait accompli and focus on damage control. This means strengthening relationships with Kenya, Tanzania, and Mozambique to prevent further Chinese naval expansion along the East African coast. It means increased U.S. naval presence in the Red Sea, which will drive up operational costs and increase the risk of accidental escalation. It means accepting that the Red Sea is no longer Western-controlled waters. This path is likely but humiliating. Path 2, Western powers attempt to pressure Sudan into canceling or limiting the Chinese agreement through sanctions, aid cutoffs, or support for opposition factions. This means prolonging the civil war, increasing humanitarian catastrophe, and likely pushing Sudan even closer to China when sanctions fail. This path has been tried in Venezuela, Syria, and Iran. It has never worked when the targeted country has a major power patron. This path is possible, but counterproductive. Path 3, and this is the one almost nobody is discussing publicly, the United States negotiates its own separate security arrangement with one of Sudan's rival factions or neighboring countries to maintain strategic presence. This could mean supporting Hemedti's rapid support forces, which would require rehabilitating a militia leader accused of war crimes. Or it could mean expanding the U.S. military footprint in Chad, South Sudan, or Eritrea, all of which come with their own complications. This path is being discussed in classified Pentagon briefings, but has not reached the level of serious policy consideration. Yet, I think we are closer to path one than the headlines suggest. Not because it is the best option, but because it is the only option that does not require resources, political will, or risk tolerance that Western governments currently possess. The Port Sudan Agreement is functionally irreversible. China has already moved equipment. Sudan has already signed contracts. Unwinding this would require either regime change in Khartoum, which the West has no capacity to engineer, or offering Sudan a better deal, which would cost tens of billions of dollars nobody is willing to spend. But here is what I am watching more closely than the agreement itself. I am watching Egypt's response over the next 30 days. If Cairo remains silent, it means Egypt has accepted Chinese naval presence as permanent. If Egypt begins military exercises near the Sudanese border or increases naval activity near Port Sudan, it means El-Sisi is preparing to contest this. And if Egypt starts negotiating its own arrangements with China, it means the entire Western alliance structure in North Africa is collapsing faster than anyone anticipated. Here are the questions I want you to take away. First, how does the United States maintain credible deterrence in the Red Sea when every military movement is visible to Chinese radar within minutes? Second, what happens to the African Union's credibility when its summits become obvious diplomatic theater for great power deals negotiated elsewhere? And third, what does it mean for the global order when middle-income countries can play great powers against each other successfully enough to secure multi-billion-dollar investments despite ongoing civil wars? Tell me in the comments what you think happens next in Port Sudan. Tell me if you think Egypt will accept this or contest it. Tell me whether you believe the African Union has any meaningful role left in African security, or if we are watching the complete marginalization of regional institutions by great power competition. We will keep tracking every development in Sudan, the Red Sea, and the broader Horn of Africa. That is what the Daily Brief does every single day. Subscribe now. Share this analysis with everyone in your network who is trying to understand why a port deal in Sudan matters more than most people realize. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next update when Egypt makes its move, because Egypt will make a move. The only question is when and how loud it will be. We will see you in the next briefing.